Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Hold On Survival Stories. I'm your host, and how are you all doing today? I hope you're having an amazing day and you're ready for another absolutely incredible survival story, because today's episode is going to warm your heart while taking you into one of the most remote and dangerous wilderness areas on Earth. Before we dive in, I want to give a huge thank you to everyone who's been supporting our channel. Your likes, comments, and subscriptions mean everything to me and help us bring you these incredible real-life survival stories every week. And for those of you who are new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because trust me, you don't want to miss any of these amazing stories. Now, today, we're heading to the Alaskan wilderness for a story that will show you just how powerful the bond between humans and animals can be when everything is on the line. This story will demonstrate how loyalty and instinct can become the ultimate survival tools, how sometimes our four-legged companions understand the wilderness better than we ever could, and how the love between a man and his dog can literally mean the difference between life and death. You'll witness how 6 days lost in the brutal Alaskan backcountry can test not just human endurance, but the incredible intelligence and devotion of man's best friend. This is the story of 42-year-old Mark Stevens, a wilderness photographer, and his 3-year-old German shepherd, Atlas, and how their hiking adventure became a 6-day fight for survival that would prove dogs truly are heroes with 4 legs and hearts bigger than we can imagine. By the end of this story, you'll understand why trust, teamwork, and unconditional love can overcome even when you're lost in one of the most unforgiving places on our planet. So grab your favorite drink, maybe give your own pet a hug if you have one, and let's dive into this absolutely incredible tale of survival that proves sometimes the best rescue team has 4 legs and a wagging tail. Thursday morning, October 12th, 2023, dawned crisp and clear in Denali National Park, Alaska, with the kind of perfect autumn weather that made Mark Stevens' heart race with anticipation. The 42-year-old wildlife photographer from Seattle had been planning this expedition for months, hoping to capture images of Alaska's spectacular fall colors and wildlife during the brief window between summer hiking season and the harsh winter that would soon lock the backcountry in ice and snow. Mark wasn't just any weekend hiker. He was an experienced outdoorsman who had spent 15 years photographing wildlife in remote locations across North America. His work had appeared in National Geographic, Outside Magazine, and numerous conservation publications. But more importantly for this trip, Mark was never alone in the wilderness. His constant companion was Atlas, a 3-year-old German shepherd who had been trained as both a wilderness companion and a search and rescue dog. Atlas was no ordinary pet. Mark had adopted him as a puppy from a program that bred dogs specifically for wilderness work, and over the past 3 years, they had developed the kind of partnership that only comes from hundreds of shared adventures. Atlas understood wilderness commands, could navigate by scent and instinct, and had an almost supernatural ability to sense danger or changes in weather conditions. Their planned route was ambitious, but well within their combined capabilities: a 5-day, 40-mile loop through some of Denali's most spectacular and remote backcountry. Mark had obtained all the necessary permits, filed detailed travel plans with park rangers, and equipped himself with comprehensive gear for October conditions that could range from pleasant hiking weather to life-threatening storms. Mark's preparation was meticulous and professional.
His pack contained cold-weather gear rated for temperatures down to -20 degrees Fahrenheit, a high-tech GPS system with satellite communication capability, emergency shelter, comprehensive first aid supplies, and enough food for 7 days, 2 extra days beyond his planned itinerary. Atlas carried his own pack with dog food, emergency supplies, and gear specifically designed for canine wilderness travel. "Ready for another adventure, buddy?" Mark asked Atlas as they shouldered their packs at the trailhead. Atlas responded with the alert, focused expression that Mark had learned to recognize as the dog's work mode, the look that said Atlas understood they were heading into serious wilderness where his skills and instincts would be crucial for their safety. The first 3 days of their expedition were absolutely perfect. Mark captured stunning photographs of golden aspen groves, snow-capped peaks, and wildlife, including caribou, Dall sheep, and even a distant grizzly bear. Atlas proved invaluable as both a hiking companion and a wildlife spotter, using his keen senses to alert Mark to photographic opportunities and potential dangers. Their partnership in the wilderness was seamless and beautiful to watch. Atlas would range ahead on the trail, checking for obstacles or wildlife, then return to guide Mark to the best viewpoints. When Mark was setting up photography equipment, Atlas would position himself as a sentry, watching for any changes in their environment that might require attention. "You're better at this than most human hiking partners I've had," Mark said to Atlas on their 3rd evening as they shared dinner beside a pristine alpine lake. Atlas's tail wagged briefly in acknowledgement, but his eyes remained alert and focused on their surroundings, the mark of a true wilderness professional. On Thursday morning, October 12th, their 4th day in the backcountry, Mark and Atlas began what should have been the final leg of their loop back towards civilization. The weather forecast had been stable, calling for clear skies and moderate temperatures. But Alaska's weather can change with terrifying speed, and neither Mark nor Atlas could have predicted what was building beyond the mountains to the west. At 10 a.m., Mark noticed the first signs of changing conditions. A shift in wind direction, a drop in atmospheric pressure that he could feel in his joints, and a subtle change in Atlas's behavior. The dog had become more alert and seemed to be scenting something in the air that concerned him. "What is it, boy?" Mark asked, watching Atlas's body language carefully. After 3 years together, Mark had learned to trust Atlas's instincts about weather and wilderness conditions. The dog often sensed changes hours before they became apparent to human senses. By noon, the first clouds were building on the western horizon, and Mark made the decision that probably saved both their lives. Instead of continuing on their planned route across an exposed ridge, they would descend into a more protected valley and wait to see how the weather developed. By 2 p.m., what had been partly cloudy skies suddenly turned into something much more ominous. A massive storm system was moving in from the west with a speed that surprised even Mark's experienced weather judgment. Within 30 minutes, visibility dropped to near zero as heavy snow began falling, driven by winds that made navigation extremely dangerous. Mark immediately began looking for emergency shelter, but in the whiteout conditions, he quickly became disoriented. The GPS that had been functioning perfectly for 4 days began giving erratic readings, possibly due to atmospheric interference from the storm. For the first time in their partnership, Mark found himself completely dependent on Atlas's natural navigation abilities. "Atlas, find shelter," Mark commanded, using one of the emergency commands he had trained the dog to understand. Atlas immediately began moving with purpose through the storm, his nose to the ground, and his body language indicating that he was following scent trails that Mark couldn't detect. At 4 p.m., Atlas led Mark to what appeared to be a natural windbreak formed by fallen trees, but the shelter was inadequate for the intensity of the storm that was developing around them. Mark was beginning to realize that they were facing a life-threatening situation that would test everything they had learned about wilderness survival. As darkness fell on October 12th, Mark Stevens and Atlas faced the beginning of what would become 6 days that would test not just their individual survival skills, but the incredible bond between a man and his dog in one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth.
By 6 p.m. on October 12th, Mark and Atlas were facing blizzard conditions that had reduced visibility to less than 10 feet and dropped the temperature to near 0 degrees Fahrenheit. The storm had intensified beyond anything in the weather forecasts, and Mark realized they were experiencing what Alaskans call a surprise blizzard, a weather event that can trap even experienced outdoorsmen with little warning. Mark's first priority was creating adequate shelter for both himself and Atlas. Using his emergency bivy sack and natural windbreaks, he constructed a small shelter that would protect them from the worst of the wind and snow. Atlas seemed to understand the urgency of their situation and stayed close to Mark, occasionally venturing short distances to scout their immediate area. "We're gonna wait this out, boy," Mark told Atlas as they huddled together in their improvised shelter. "Tomorrow morning we'll figure out where we are and get back on track." But as the night progressed, it became clear that this wasn't going to be a brief weather delay. The storm continued with unrelenting intensity, and by morning, Mark estimated that over 2 feet of snow had fallen, completely transforming the landscape and obliterating any familiar landmarks. Friday morning, October 13th, brought continued snowfall and the sobering realization that Mark's GPS system was malfunctioning. The device that had been their primary navigation tool was giving impossible readings and appeared to have been damaged by either the cold or moisture infiltration. Mark was an experienced wilderness navigator, but in the uniformly white landscape created by the blizzard, traditional navigation techniques were nearly useless. "Atlas, we need to find the trail," Mark said, hoping that the dog's superior senses could locate familiar scents or landmarks that were invisible to human perception. Atlas immediately began ranging in expanding circles around their shelter, his nose constantly working as he searched for any familiar scents. After an hour of searching, Atlas returned to Mark with his body language indicating that he had found something significant. The dog led Mark through the snow to what appeared to be a depression in the landscape, possibly the trail they had been following, now buried under heavy snow. Mark's confidence in Atlas's abilities was absolute, based on 3 years of watching the dog navigate successfully in challenging conditions. If Atlas believed they had found their route, Mark was willing to trust that judgment even when he couldn't confirm it with his own senses. Following what Atlas believed to be their trail, Mark and his dog began moving through the storm-transformed landscape. But after several hours of difficult travel through deep snow, it became apparent that they were not reaching any familiar landmarks. The storm had not only buried their trail, but had also changed the entire character of the terrain. At 3 p.m. on Friday, Mark faced a terrifying realization. They were lost. His GPS was non-functional, his map and compass were useless in the featureless white landscape, and even Atlas's exceptional navigation abilities were being overwhelmed by the storm's impact on the environment. "We're in trouble, Atlas,"
Mark said aloud, as much to process his own thoughts as to communicate with his dog. Atlas seemed to sense Mark's anxiety and moved closer, providing both physical warmth and emotional support. Mark's wilderness experience told him that their best strategy was to stop moving and establish a base camp where they could wait for the storm to pass and for visibility to improve enough for proper navigation. Continuing to travel in whiteout conditions would only increase their chances of injury or becoming even more lost. Using his emergency shelter and the natural protection provided by a cluster of trees that Atlas had located, Mark established a more substantial campsite that could sustain them for several days if necessary. The work was exhausting in the deep snow and cold temperatures, but Atlas helped by using his body to pack down snow and by staying alert for any changes in their environment. "Good boy, Atlas," Mark said as they settled in for what he hoped would be their last night lost in the storm. But as Saturday morning arrived with continued snowfall and no improvement in visibility, Mark began to face the possibility that their situation was more serious than a simple navigational delay. They were truly lost in one of the most remote and unforgiving wilderness areas in North America, and their survival would depend on both Mark's experience and Atlas's instincts working together. Saturday morning, October 14th, marked the beginning of Mark and Atlas's third day lost in the Alaskan wilderness, and it brought a crisis that would test their partnership in ways neither had ever imagined. Mark woke to find that the storm had finally passed, but the landscape around them was completely unrecognizable. A pristine white wilderness that bore no resemblance to the terrain they had been hiking through just 3 days earlier. Mark's first priority was attempting to re-establish their position using traditional navigation techniques now that visibility had improved. He climbed to the highest point near their campsite and used his compass and map to try to identify recognizable landmarks. But the heavy snowfall had changed the appearance of every feature, making even prominent peaks and valleys difficult to identify with certainty. "Atlas, we need to find high ground and figure out where we are," Mark said, as he prepared to move their camp to a better vantage point. But as Mark shouldered his pack and took his first steps upslope, disaster struck with terrifying suddenness. The heavy snow had created unstable conditions on what appeared to be solid ground. Mark's left foot broke through a hidden layer of snow into a crevice between rocks, and he fell hard, his leg twisting at an unnatural angle as his full body weight plus pack came down on the trapped limb. The sound of the bone breaking was audible even in the open wilderness, a sharp crack that Mark felt as much as heard. The pain was immediate and excruciating, and when Mark tried to stand, his left leg collapsed beneath him. He had suffered what was clearly a significant fracture just below the knee. "No, no, no," Mark gasped as the reality of his situation sank in. He was lost in the Alaskan wilderness with a broken leg, limited supplies, and no functioning communication equipment. In normal circumstances, a broken leg would be a serious but manageable emergency. In their current situation, it could be a death sentence. Atlas immediately sensed that something was catastrophically wrong. The dog approached Mark carefully, whining softly, and clearly distressed by his human partner's condition. Atlas had been trained to recognize human medical emergencies, and his behavior indicated that he understood the severity of what had happened. Mark's wilderness first aid training helped him assess and treat his injury, but the prognosis was sobering. The fracture appeared to be a clean break rather than a compound fracture, which meant no immediate risk of infection, but it also meant that he would be unable to walk without assistance. In their current situation, immobility could be fatal. Using his first aid supplies and improvised materials, Mark created a splint that would stabilize his leg and allow limited movement using a makeshift crutch he fashioned from a tree branch. The process was extremely painful and exhausting, but it gave him some mobility and reduced the risk of further injury to the fracture. "Atlas, I need you to be my legs now," Mark said to his dog, using the calm, authoritative tone that Atlas had been trained to respond to during emergencies. "We're going to need to work together like never before." Atlas's response was immediate and remarkable. The dog seemed to understand that their normal roles had changed and that he would need to take primary responsibility for many survival tasks that Mark could no longer perform effectively. Atlas began ranging farther from their camp, clearly searching for something that his instincts told him they needed. At 2 p.m. on Saturday, Atlas returned from one of his scouting missions with behavior that indicated he had found something significant. The dog led Mark, who was moving slowly and painfully on his improvised crutch, to a location about 200 yards from their campsite where Atlas had discovered a natural shelter formed by an overhang of rock. The shelter Atlas had found was far superior to anything Mark could have constructed in his current condition. It provided protection from wind and precipitation, had a flat area suitable for camping, and was located near what appeared to be a small stream that could provide fresh water. Atlas had essentially found them a survival retreat that could sustain them for an extended period. "Good boy, Atlas. This is perfect," Mark said as he examined the shelter. The dog's tail wagged briefly in acknowledgement, but Atlas remained focused and alert, his instincts telling him that their emergency was far from over. Moving their gear to the new shelter was a challenging operation that required multiple trips and careful coordination between Mark and Atlas. The dog seemed to understand that Mark's mobility was severely limited and began carrying supplies in his pack and in his mouth, making the relocation possible despite Mark's injury. As Saturday evening approached, Mark faced the psychological challenge of accepting that rescue was not going to arrive quickly. His injury had transformed their situation from a temporary navigational problem into a long-term survival scenario that could last days or even weeks. "Atlas, we're going to be here for a while," Mark said as they settled into their new shelter. "I need you to help me figure out how we're going to survive until someone finds us." Atlas's response was to curl up close to Mark, providing both physical warmth and emotional comfort. But throughout the night, the dog remained alert and watchful, his senses constantly monitoring their environment for any changes that might affect their survival. As Mark fell asleep on their third night lost in the Alaskan wilderness, he was beginning to understand that their survival would depend not just on his own experience and supplies, but on Atlas's remarkable instincts and abilities. The dog was no longer just a companion. He had become Mark's lifeline, in a situation where human limitations were being exceeded by the demands of wilderness survival.
Sunday morning, October 15th, marked a turning point in Mark and Atlas's survival story. Mark woke to find his injured leg stiff and painful, but more importantly, he discovered that Atlas had been active during the night in ways that demonstrated the dog's incredible survival instincts. Near their shelter, Mark found evidence that Atlas had been hunting during the early morning hours. The dog had caught and killed a snowshoe hare, providing fresh protein that would supplement their dwindling food supplies. Atlas had also arranged the carcass in a way that suggested he understood it was meant to be shared with Mark. "Atlas, you amazing dog," Mark said as he examined the hare. "You're keeping us alive." Atlas's hunting success was not just about providing food. It demonstrated that the dog understood their situation, required him to take on survival responsibilities that went far beyond normal dog behavior. Atlas was thinking and acting like a survival partner rather than a pet. Mark's condition on Sunday was challenging but stable.
His broken leg was immobilized by the splint, and he was managing pain with over-the-counter medications from his first aid kit. More concerning was his overall energy level, which was being depleted by the constant effort required to maintain body temperature and perform basic tasks with his limited mobility. Atlas seemed to recognize that Mark's capabilities were compromised and began taking on tasks that the dog had never been specifically trained for. Atlas brought Mark water by soaking his fur in the nearby stream and allowing Mark to wring out the liquid. When Mark needed firewood, Atlas dragged branches to their shelter using his teeth and incredible strength. At 1 p.m. on Sunday, Atlas exhibited behavior that initially puzzled Mark, but would prove to be life-saving intelligence. The dog began ranging in specific patterns around their shelter, always returning within an hour and always bringing back information about their environment through his sense, sounds, and behavior. Atlas was essentially conducting systematic reconnaissance of their area, gathering information about resources, hazards, and potential rescue opportunities. The dog's ability to process and remember complex spatial information was allowing him to build a mental map of their survival area that was far more detailed than anything Mark could create in his current condition. Sunday afternoon brought Mark's first serious food crisis. Their emergency rations were running low faster than planned due to the increased caloric demands of cold weather survival and Mark's injury recovery. Mark calculated that they had perhaps 2 more days of human food remaining, assuming careful rationing. But Atlas had already begun addressing the food shortage in ways that showcased his remarkable problem-solving abilities. In addition to the hare he had caught, Atlas located and brought Mark edible plants that were still accessible despite the snow cover. The dog seemed to have an instinctive understanding of what vegetation was safe for human consumption. "How do you know these are okay for me to eat?" Mark asked Atlas, as the dog presented him with rose hips and other winter-hardy plants. Atlas's response was simply to look at Mark with the intelligent, focused expression that had become his constant demeanor since their emergency began. Mark's most serious crisis on Sunday came when he attempted to move around their shelter area and re-injured his broken leg, causing intense pain and potential damage to his improvised splint. The setback was both physically and psychologically devastating, as it demonstrated how dependent he had become on Atlas for their survival. Atlas's response to Mark's setback was immediate and remarkable. The dog seemed to understand that Mark's mobility was now even more limited, and Atlas began expanding his range of activities to compensate. Atlas started bringing Mark everything he needed: water, food, firewood, and even soft materials that could be used to improve their shelter. Sunday evening brought the most touching moment of their ordeal so far. As temperatures dropped and Mark struggled to stay warm despite his sleeping bag and emergency gear, Atlas made a decision that probably saved his life. The dog climbed into Mark's sleeping bag and positioned himself against Mark's injured leg, providing both warmth and protection for the fracture. "Thank you, boy," Mark whispered as Atlas settled in for the night. "I don't think I would make it without you." Atlas's response was a gentle tail wag and a positioning that indicated he understood his role as Mark's protector and provider. The dog remained alert throughout the night, ready to respond to any changes in their environment while keeping Mark warm and safe. As Sunday night turned into Monday morning, Mark realized that Atlas had essentially taken over primary responsibility for their survival. The dog was hunting, gathering, providing security, and even serving as a heating system. Atlas had transformed from a hiking companion into a wilderness survival expert whose instincts were keeping them both alive. Mark fell asleep on their 4th night lost, knowing that their survival was now completely dependent on a German shepherd whose intelligence, loyalty, and instincts were proving to be more valuable than any piece of survival equipment he had ever carried into the wilderness.
Monday morning, October 16th, brought Mark a sobering realization. They had been missing for 5 days, and while Atlas's remarkable abilities were keeping them alive, their long-term survival would require rescue by other humans. Mark's injury was not healing properly without medical attention, and their food supplies were nearly exhausted despite Atlas's hunting success. Mark's broken leg had become increasingly problematic. Without proper medical treatment, the injury was affecting his overall health and limiting his ability to contribute to their survival efforts. Mark realized that if rescue didn't arrive soon, Atlas would need to do something that seemed impossible: go for help. "Atlas, we need to think about getting help," Mark said to his dog as they shared breakfast consisting of rabbit meat and the last of Mark's energy bars. Atlas's response was the alert, focused attention that indicated he was ready to receive important instructions. Mark had never trained Atlas for solo rescue missions, but the dog's intelligence and wilderness experience suggested that he might be capable of finding help and leading rescuers back to their location. It was a desperate plan, but Mark was beginning to understand that desperate measures might be their only option. At 10 a.m. on Monday, Mark made the most difficult decision of their entire ordeal. He would send Atlas to search for help while remaining in their shelter alone. The plan required Atlas to find human activity or civilization, somehow communicate that his owner needed rescue, and then lead help back to their remote location. "Atlas, listen to me carefully," Mark said, using the command voice that Atlas had been trained to recognize for important instructions. "I need you to go find help. Find people, find rangers, find anyone who can help us." Atlas's body language indicated that he understood this was different from his normal scouting missions. The dog looked at Mark intently, then at the wilderness around them, clearly processing the magnitude of what was being asked of him. Mark attached a note to Atlas's collar explaining their situation, their approximate location, and the urgency of Mark's medical condition. The note also included Mark's name, emergency contact information, and details that would help rescue teams understand what they were dealing with. At 11 a.m. on Monday, after what appeared to be careful consideration, Atlas set off on his rescue mission. Mark watched his dog disappear into the wilderness with emotions ranging from hope to terror. Atlas was now his only chance for survival, but Mark was also sending his best friend into unknown dangers that could prevent him from ever returning. Monday afternoon was the longest and most difficult period of Mark's entire life. Alone in the wilderness with a broken leg and virtually no food, he faced the possibility that Atlas might become lost, injured, or unable to find help. The silence of the wilderness, which had been comforting when Atlas was present, became oppressive and frightening. Mark spent Monday afternoon preparing for multiple scenarios. If Atlas returned with help, Mark wanted to be ready for evacuation. If Atlas didn't return, Mark needed to maximize his chances of surviving alone until rescue teams eventually found him. He organized his remaining supplies, improved his shelter, and tried to conserve energy while staying alert for any signs of Atlas's return. At 6 p.m. on Monday, Mark heard barking in the distance, Atlas's voice calling through the wilderness. But the barking was coming from multiple directions and seemed to involve more than one dog, suggesting that Atlas might have found help. 20 minutes later, Mark saw the most beautiful sight of his life: Atlas leading a team of search and rescue personnel through the snow toward their shelter. The dog was animated and excited, clearly proud of his success in finding help and leading rescuers back to his injured owner. "Are you Mark Stevens?" Rodriguez said. Your dog found our base camp about 6 miles from here and made it very clear that someone needed help." "That's me," Mark replied, his voice breaking with emotion and relief. "Atlas saved my life." "How did he find you?" Rodriguez explained that Atlas had approached their search base camp with behavior that immediately indicated an emergency. The dog had barked, whined, and physically tried to lead team members away from the camp. When they attached a tracking device to Atlas and followed him, he led them directly back to Mark's location. "We've been searching for you for 3 days," Rodriguez continued, as her team began examining Mark's injuries and preparing him for evacuation. "Atlas led us right to you." The rescue operation was complex, but efficiently executed. Mark's broken leg required careful stabilization before he could be moved, and the team had to navigate challenging terrain to get him to a location where helicopter evacuation was possible. Throughout the entire process, Atlas stayed close to Mark, clearly understanding that his mission was complete but wanting to ensure his human partner was safe. Tuesday morning, October 17th, Mark Stevens was airlifted from the Alaskan wilderness to a hospital in Anchorage, ending a 6-day ordeal that had tested both human endurance and the incredible bond between a man and his dog. Atlas rode in the helicopter beside Mark, finally relaxing for the first time since their adventure had turned into a survival crisis. As Mark was wheeled into the emergency room, Atlas was treated like the hero he had become. The search and rescue team, hospital staff, and eventually news media all recognized that this was a story about more than human survival. It was about the remarkable intelligence, loyalty, and love that dogs can provide when everything else fails.
Tuesday morning, October 17th, 2023, brought Mark Stevens back to civilization after 6 days lost in the Alaskan wilderness. But the real hero of the rescue was being celebrated by everyone who had participated in the operation. Atlas, the 3-year-old German Shepherd, had accomplished something that professional search and rescue teams train for years to achieve. He had located help, communicated an emergency, and led rescuers back to his injured owner across miles of unmarked wilderness. Dr. Patricia Martinez, the emergency physician who treated Mark at Providence, Alaska Medical Center, was amazed by his condition considering his 6-day ordeal with a broken leg in freezing conditions. "Mark, considering what you've been through, you're in remarkably good shape," Dr. Martinez said as she examined his injuries. "Your leg needs surgery to properly set the fracture, but you don't show signs of serious hypothermia, malnutrition, or infection." "How is that possible?" asked a reporter who was covering the rescue story. Mark's answer was simple. "Atlas kept me alive. He hunted for food, brought me water, shared his body heat, and finally went for help when I couldn't survive much longer on my own. He's the reason I'm here." The surgical repair of Mark's broken leg was successful, but his recovery gave him time to reflect on the incredible partnership that had saved his life. Atlas had demonstrated abilities that went far beyond normal dog training, showing intelligence, problem-solving skills, and emotional understanding that seemed almost human. "Atlas didn't just follow his training," Mark explained to the search and rescue team during his hospital recovery. "He invented new solutions to problems he had never encountered before. He became a wilderness survival expert because that's what the situation required." Atlas's rescue mission had been even more remarkable than initially understood. Search and Rescue Coordinator Captain James Wilson explained that Atlas had navigated over 6 miles of difficult terrain to reach their base camp, then had clearly and persistently communicated that he needed help for someone else. "We've worked with search dogs for 20 years, but we've never seen anything like what Atlas did," Captain Wilson told reporters. "He showed up at our camp with obvious urgency, refused food and attention, and immediately tried to lead us away. When we followed him, he navigated directly back to Mark's location across terrain that would challenge experienced human navigators. The story of Mark and Atlas's survival became national news as an example of the incredible bond between humans and dogs and the remarkable intelligence that dogs can display in emergency situations. Atlas became a celebrity, appearing on television shows and inspiring countless stories about canine heroism. But for Mark, the most important aspect of their experience was what it revealed about the relationship he had built with Atlas over 3 years of wilderness adventures. Atlas didn't save me because of his training, Mark explained during interviews. He saved me because he loved me, and because we had built a partnership based on trust and communication. 6 weeks after their rescue, Mark had recovered enough to return to limited hiking with Atlas. Their first trip back into the wilderness was emotional for both of them, but it also demonstrated that their partnership had been strengthened rather than weakened by their survival experience. Atlas is more confident now, and I trust his instincts completely, Mark said during their first post-rescue hiking trip. He proved that he can handle anything the wilderness throws at us. Atlas's story became a case study for search and rescue organizations and dog training programs throughout North America. His ability to navigate, hunt, provide medical support, and ultimately conduct a solo rescue mission demonstrated capabilities that trainers are now trying to understand and replicate. Atlas showed us that dogs are capable of far more complex thinking and problem-solving than we previously understood, said Dr. Sarah Kim, a veterinary behaviorist who studied Atlas's rescue. His actions during those 6 days represent some of the most sophisticated canine behavior ever documented. Mark never returned to the specific area where they had become lost, but he continued wilderness photography with Atlas, always with enhanced safety protocols and deeper appreciation for his canine partner's abilities. He also began volunteering with search and rescue organizations, sharing his experience to help train other wilderness travelers. Those 6 days changed my relationship with Atlas forever, Mark reflected during a wilderness safety seminar 6 months after their rescue. I always knew he was intelligent and loyal, but I learned that he's capable of things that seem almost miraculous. He's not just my hiking companion, he's my partner in every sense of the word. When asked what people should understand about the relationship between humans and dogs in survival situations, Mark's answer reflected both his personal experience and his respect for canine intelligence. Dogs don't just follow commands, they think, they problem solve, and they love us enough to do things they've never been taught when our lives depend on it. Atlas didn't save me because I trained him to. He saved me because that's what partners do for each other. Atlas continued to live and work with Mark, but with a new status as one of the most famous search and rescue dogs in North America. He regularly visited schools and community groups, helping to educate people about wilderness safety and the incredible capabilities of working dogs. Atlas taught me that survival isn't just about human skills and equipment, Mark said during a television interview on the first anniversary of their rescue. Sometimes survival is about the relationships we build, the trust we develop, and the love that motivates others to do impossible things to keep us safe. Atlas proved that the best survival tool you can have is a partner who will never give up on you.
This story, like all the stories we share on Hold On, survival stories, demonstrates that survival sometimes comes from the most unexpected places and the most loyal hearts. Mark Stevens and Atlas's 6 days lost in the Alaskan wilderness shows us that the bond between humans and animals can become the ultimate survival tool when everything else fails. The heroes of this story include not just Atlas himself, but the search and rescue teams who responded to a dog's call for help, the medical professionals who treated Mark's injuries, and all the people who understood that this was a story about partnership, loyalty, and love in its purest form. Most importantly, this story shows us that survival is often about the relationships we build and the trust we develop with those who share our adventures. Atlas's story teaches us that intelligence, loyalty, and love can overcome challenges that seem impossible, and that our animal companions are capable of far more than we often realize. His hunting skills, navigation abilities, and ultimate rescue mission demonstrated that dogs are not just pets, they are thinking, feeling partners who can rise to extraordinary challenges when the situation demands it. Most importantly, Mark and Atlas's story shows us that even when we're lost in the most remote places on Earth, even when we're injured and facing impossible odds, there's always reason to hold on. Sometimes help comes from the most unexpected sources, and sometimes our greatest strength comes from the love and loyalty of those who refuse to give up on us. But before we go, I want to ask you some important questions. Do you have a special bond with an animal companion that has gotten you through difficult times? Have you ever been in a situation where your pet's instincts or behavior helped keep you safe? And for those of you who love outdoor adventures, do you have the training and partnership with your animal companions that could make the difference in an emergency? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Share your own stories of animal companions who have shown remarkable intelligence or loyalty, or outdoor adventures where your pets proved to be valuable partners. Your experience might help someone else understand the incredible value of the human-animal bond in both everyday life and emergency situations. If this story touched your heart, or taught you something about the incredible capabilities of our animal companions, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. Your support helps us bring you more incredible survival stories every week and helps us honor the courage of both humans and animals who show us what true partnership means. Thank you for listening to Hold On Survival Stories. Stay safe, cherish your animal companions, and remember, sometimes the best survival equipment you can have is a loyal friend who will never give up on you, no matter what.